Okay, so if you caught my last video, then you'll know I'm doing woodworking in my spare time. My current job gives me access to free pallets, and that means free wood. My first endeavour is to make a router table, as I have a router and I want to make more use of it. Specifically, I'm going to be making a bunch of storage boxes using a router. It just so happens that about 2 years ago, I purchased a collection of these woodsmith books on eBay, and one of them has the plans for a router table. So I'm going to follow these plans and do the best I can. While I am a perfectionist with projects like this, I've accepted that this may be a bit rough around the edges while I learn techniques, but you've got to start somewhere. This is going to be a bit of a learning adventure too, as these books all have the measurements in imperial and I've hardly used them, seeing as I live in a metric country. Starting off with, I need 12 lengths of wood that are 1.5 inches by 3 inches, just under 40 inches in length, basically 2x4s. Now the length isn't an issue, I've got lots of wood this long. It's more so the thickness and width that I'll have an issue with. The chunky wood I have for this is 3 1/8 inches by 2 inches. Now this might sound perfect, but due to it being non-construction type wood, it is usually warped or bowed and hence will require milling to make it square and uniform. With this in mind, the sizes I'm going to end up with after milling will be 1.5 inches by 2 5/8 inches. Basically, I'm losing 3/8 of an inch. Of course, I'll have to be careful when following the plans, as I'll need to account for this change in specific measurements. Speaking of milling, most of this video is about me learning how to use my new DeWalt DW735 thickness planer. You'll see the steps of the milling process and what mistakes I've made and the things I've learnt. First up, before I could use the thicknesser, I needed to come up with some sort of wood chip collection system, as this machine spits out wood chips like there's no tomorrow. Due to the force that the machine spits out the wood chips, I don't need a dust extraction system, I just need a way to collect them. I decided to follow some YouTube videos out there which utilise a garbage bin and create this thing underneath called a theme baffle. It's basically a way of separating the wood chips into the bottom of the bin and letting the air flow out the top. My attempt at making this theme baffle was okay. A lot of the finer dust still blocks the mesh on the exit port, so I need to turn it off and tap the exit port to unclog it, but the main purpose of the collection of the wood chips is mostly achieved. When using the thicknesser to mill the wood, the bottom surface needs to be flat and the top surface is what is cut away by the blades. Now when the wood you are using isn't flat, you need to use a known flat piece, like this MDF, as the flat surface and use shims to keep the wood stable. I'm using playing cards here that have been glued together, so a 4 of spades is 4 cards thick. Then you're supposed to use some hot glue to lock it in place. However, on my first attempt, I decided to skip the gluing step. As you can see here, that wasn't a smart move as the wood was slipping. Honestly, I skipped this step as I had never used a hot glue gun before and I didn't want to wait for the glue to dry. However, once I realised it set instantly, I was hot gluing like there was no tomorrow. With the glue holding things together, it was working much better. However, I was still having issues with the wood coming out of the thicknesser with the bow in it. I was getting quite frustrated at this point, so I took a break and went back and watched the YouTube video again. I was doing everything exactly the same. The presenter had even made the comment on how simple it was. So I went back to basics and checked over my MDF template, and it turns out that it had formed a bow. It must have picked up some moisture from the garage floor overnight, combined with being outside in the sun. Once I tried another piece of MDF, everything started working exactly as it should have. So I then spent the next few hours doing these steps 2 lengths at a time on the template. That means shimming it with the cards, gluing it up, running it through the thicknesser for multiple passes until both lengths are flat, prying them off the template, removing the glue and repeating. Once the wood has been milled on one side, the MDF template is not required to mill the other side. However, that still means I need to run each of the 12 lengths through the thicknesser for multiple passes until the required thickness is achieved. I realised halfway through this process, I should be running each length through one after the other at one height, then dropping the cutting height and running each length through again. This would save a lot more time and ensure they are all the exact same thickness on the final pass. A time-saving lesson learned. Now that I have two sides parallel, I need to repeat the same steps on the perpendicular side to square up the lumber. I mistakenly tried doing the same steps on two lengths, only to realise that by using the playing cards, I wasn't squaring the wood at 90 degrees to the newly milled edges. This also means that I screwed up these two lengths and actually had to do another two lengths all over again. Another lesson learned. Back to squaring this edge off, I realised here that I needed to use the table saw to be able to create that cut. By using double-sided tape, I can stick the length of wood down onto a template piece and let it overhang a little, and then the saw would slice off what I didn't need. I couldn't use the same template wood I was using earlier, as the overall thickness was more than that of the maximum height the blade would cut. With another thinner piece of wood, I was able to achieve this, but for some reason I didn't realise until later, the table saw fence was slightly misaligned, so the beginning of my cut wasn't accurate. However, the last 80% was. As you can imagine, this is a bit frustrating. However, there's actually quite a bit of excess remaining. All I will need to do is shim out that first 20% of the cut and run it through the thicknesser until the other side is flat, and then flip it over and the remaining passes will bring it down to the correct thickness I need. Another lesson learned. As you can see here, while I'm getting free wood in the form of pallets, before it can actually be used, a bit of work is required to prepare it first. Obviously, with this being my introduction into using a thickness planer, I've made a few mistakes and not done it in the most efficient manner. Moving forward, I know what steps are required, and I also know a few things I'll do differently in the future. Clearly, just watching someone on YouTube doing this does not mean I'll have mastered it the first time. I need to go through the process and make mistakes to learn. If you've got a learning story like this, then please share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. So that's where I'm up to at this point. Once I get these 12 lengths milled to the dimension I need, I'll be able to actually start building the frame of the router table, something I'm looking forward to. I hope you've enjoyed watching my learning journey so far, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye!